Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm waiting on Richard. He's going to be here soon, but we wanted to come on and talk today, like we always do, about things that are part of our culture, part of our lives, both personally and culturally. So we're getting the conversation started. And I know Richard and I were talking some time ago about, we're just kind of driving across Guyana, right? And the landscape is changing physically. There are a lot more people in Guyana now than there was before. Welcome individuals who are coming to do business, work in the oil and gas sector, and just all sorts of activities, right, that are going on in our country. And so when you drive from highway to highway, there is so many changes that we're seeing. But also some of these changes are cultural as well. So we see things that represent sort of North American culture, right? So we've always had the Church's Chicken, KFC, those kinds of sort of brands that are sort of U.S. North American brands. Recently, we had Starbucks. That was huge, right? Starbucks is now in Guyana as well, and so everybody's waking up to Starbucks coffee and going out and sort of into the Amazonia Mall and getting some early coffee and things, and so it's a little different. When I grew up, did not grow up drinking coffee. I tell you that much, right? Grew up drinking tea, tisam, fever grass, and all these teas. And coffee was like one of those last resort things that many of us came into, got into. And so, sort of, it's really interesting now that we've kind of developed a coffee caffeine sort of drinking culture. And I'd be wrong. I'm challenged. Please, if this isn't your experience, I'm sharing mine. I grew up on the west coast of Demerara in Stewartville. Spent a lot of time in places like Den Amstel and so forth, and Lyme in places like Iflot and Katrina and Lenora. So if this isn't how, if this isn't your experience, you can't relate to it, that's fine. Please put it in the comments. But I remember growing up on tea, whether it was black tea or milk tea or a glass of milk, and juice and water. But I don't remember a heavy sort of caffeinated culture. But now we have Starbucks, and I'm sure they did their homework, so they must realize that Guyanese in today's modern world are coffee drinkers in large part. We are coffee drinkers now. I still don't drink coffee. It's just not my thing. I used to drink coffee when I want to stay awake to study, through the many years that I've studied. And so coffee kind of had its, purpose, So hold a sec. I just realized I did not send my buddy the link I needed to send him. So let me make sure I send him the link now. All right. 1 second. Let me make sure I send Richard this link. 1 second. I keep wondering why he's not on, and I realize I sent my brother the link. Sorry about that, bro. I am doing it right now. Yep, that's totally on me. So he's coming on. So Richard will be on in a sec. Yeah, but the culture is getting different, right? We have to admit that. And so are we? All righty. I'm dropping Rich on. Rich, we are live. I went ahead and get started. So if you're getting set up, I'm just doing sort of the pre-intro, letting everybody
That's all
know that
right.
we're talking about losing Guyanese identity. I know you're a big coffee drinker, Rich, and so
That's
one of the things I was
right.
talking about is when you go across Guyana now, you see the landscape, physical landscape is changing, and so you see this, even in architecture and some of the buildings, and in the housing communities that are going up, right? So you see this change is already happening, which is great. So it's developing. You see so many roads going on, right? So this is really good work by the leadership of the country, really trying to get and expand the country, right? Which I think is great. And we're meeting with a lot of different people across the world, and so a lot of people are coming to our country, and they're bringing their culture as well. So I was talking about the fact that we have KFC, sort of these sort of the hallmark of North American brands are sort of showing up in the country already. So you see, we had for some time of course, things like KFC, Church's Chicken in terms of the fast food industry, but now Starbucks is there, and I know you're a big Starbucks guy, and so I was saying that when I grew up, I didn't know that we had a major sort of caffeinated culture. When I grew up drinking tea, right? Very British culture, tisam, fever grass, whatever bush you could find, and maybe even some green tea and tea bag and things like that. But the goal was tea drinking was really the big deal in Guyana. And I'm sure Starbucks did their work and realized, well, Guyanese got to be drinking a lot of coffee, right? So they show up, and you were in there, and I'm sure there were a lot of people in there. I haven't gone into Starbucks yet, so maybe you could share your experience. I know you've lived in different cities in the U.S. and love to stop by Starbucks and get some coffee. And I like their banana nut bread and nice and warmed up and stuff like that. So how was that experience like for you? Because I know you were recently in Guyana, and here is this culture that you're accustomed to, say, in North America, and you're able to enjoy that in Guyana. Is that strange as a Guyanese for you? Is this a new addition to the Guyanese culture? Do you feel like you're living the American dream in Guyana? What was that experience like for you?
It was it was a good experience. I think there is certainly something I think I find encouraging about the coffee shop setting, and I think it sort of has the ability to do more than just be a coffee shop. I think there's certainly these big brands like Starbucks, who I think are more geared towards creating sort of a consistent experience wherever you go, right? So the good thing about global brands is that there's consistency. So, if you get a certain drink in the US or Canada and you go to Guyana, there's a high likelihood that all those Starbucks everywhere will have the same. Um, and in some cases, I think I saw a couple of drinks in Florida because I was there for a little bit. That is very sort of Florida, right? It's not necessarily available everywhere. And so I think there is sort of an upside. For me, it's kind of nice because like I have this routine that I follow whenever I'm away from home is that I generally wake up before everybody else in the house. And so I just go find a coffee shop and sit down there and do some reading and some writing. And so for me, it's a nice little escape, and it's nice to be able to have it. I was close by Starbucks, so it was a little bit easier to just drive 5 minutes down the road and be at the Starbucks. Um, and so I think it's encouraging, but to your point, I think of losing our Guyanese identity. I don't necessarily think that because we have the introduction of something that's different from what we have or we identify with or what we practice means that you necessarily have to lose your identity. I certainly think Starbucks is pricey, right? So it's not necessarily going to cater to every person, but I do think there are things that we can learn from having a major brand like that and the way they do business and the way they interact with people. Um, and sort of maybe steal a little bit of their know-how, right? The way they do business and the way they interact with customers, and then take that and use it to create our own thing, right? So as you said, is there a culture of drinking things other than coffee, right? We do drink. Well, I remember all my time in being in Guyana, I drank coffee and hot beverages in general, which is weird because Guyana is a very hot place. But we drink a lot of hot things, right? And so how do we take that?
That stuff is good for the
Um,
win, brother. It's for the win, not for the cool down. To the gas.
there you, there you go, right? Yeah, but how do we take that and develop something that's local and is ours? I do think we're not always doing a great job of it. I think we're
Yeah, I
trying in
agree.
some cases. Because I had a couple of experience. There's a sort of a longing to have a local experience and to support the local brand, but in some places it just doesn't deliver, man. Like
Yeah,
we went to a little cafe there. We wanted to eat some food. We wanted to just sit and eat some food, some good Guyanese food, right? But we would have liked for it to be warm, right? And presented as though we're eating it there, not as though we're taking it out the door. And so, going into a place and having that experience, it's kind of like, it just doesn't deliver, right?
yeah,
And so I
yeah.
think, so
That's a good point. So no, you make a really good point. We have our cultural identity and we have our culture. And I'm going to say this personally. I feel that when it comes, if we're talking food here, because we're talking about food. For those who are now joining, we're talking about are we losing our Guyanese identity and the fact that we're seeing a lot of changes in our country, both physically, but also some cultural changes are taking place. Um, and so, Rich, to the point you're making, I believe that when it comes to food, Guyanese food is great food. But I think you touched on something that's important is that we don't always create the experience around the food, which is what a lot of people look for, right? And a simple thing like going to a place to eat and having the food warm up. So, for example, you know Lisa, right? So Lisa and I hang out a lot. And when we go to get food, for example, one of the things she always brings up is like, she always want to remind people to warm up the food, right? Because she wants it at a particular temperature, and you're right, and that's a particular experience because it isn't always presented in a way that you can enjoy, which is really good food, like some good cook up, right, with pepper and fried fish and stuff. You don't always get it in an environment and present it in a way, say like when Starbucks comes in and all they're doing is selling coffee, but it's not the coffee that's important, right? It's the experience of having coffee in a particular environment and having it in a certain way, with
and
varieties of milk. And so they try to even expand on how you can have coffee. And that experience alone, being able to meet up with people and talk, the free Wi-Fi, for example. I used to always remember when I would go into a Starbucks initially, even if I didn't say buy coffee, I just bought tea. One of the huge things you'd be able to do is to sit and just get free Wi-Fi and be able to like sit there and work. And then, of course, if you're sitting and working, you're getting hungry and thirsty, right? So you're going up and you're buying things. And so I think you make a really good point is that we have to find a way, like we're going to lose our culture if we don't find a really good way to package it and sort of retail it, right, and put it back out there. Like even drinking tea, which is a great thing. Like I said, I was raised thinking, tea was always good for gas, but it's good for all these other things as well, right? There's all this sort of medicinal and healthcare benefits of just drinking tea. I prefer tea over coffee. But where is the tea drinking shop, right? Where is the Starbucks equivalent of the variety of teas that we have in Ghana? And there are a few shops that are coming up. I know there's one I believe there's one that's going to be at Amazonia Mall. I know there's one at Movie Town where folks are trying to do teas as well. But you're touching a really good point. It's about experience, and if we can't create the experience around our culture, you could see that it dies out, right? If we aren't sort of repackaging and bringing this back right to the fore. And I think that's a really important point that you made there. I support that 100%. So are you thinking then that you don't see a problem with sort of this overemphasis on things North American, right? Because at one point, people used to argue that if folks from America are coming to Guyana, are they coming to eat KFC, drink Starbucks, and go to Red Lobster, or are they or are they coming to enjoy Guyanese culture, and what are we doing to present that culture to them, or are we just waiting for foreign brands to sort of dominate the landscape, and is that what the local Guyanese are now saying is the thing that we want to go into? What's your feel on that? What's your take on that? Where do you feel like we want to go on this? Are we willing to just kind of dump what we have and just be like, "Yo, man, the North American sounds better, man. Let's take it." Like, what's your take on that?
No, I think there's so much richness, right, in our Guyanese culture. There's so much that we do really well. Our food's is just exceptional, right? Like, I mean, it's good, wholesome food. And even the fast food, the fast food with our local ingredients just seems to taste better. I mean, I'm just gonna say that off the top, right? Um, but I do think that there is a need for a slightly sort of elevated presentation, right, and an environment. And I know this is not a knock on anybody or um, I think we're going through a process, right? And so we should be able to have these conversations very openly. I know that there are certain places that are delivering a better environment, and they're working on delivering a better environment so people can experience food, right? But also, I think a piece of it comes with service, right? You talk about Starbucks, right? And it's not necessarily the coffee or the food. But when you talked about your banana nut bread, you talked about it being warm, right? That's what came to your mind. It wasn't a cold banana nut bread, right? Like you talked about it being warm. And so I think I think the brands should come. Like I said, I think brands come because people are gonna want to experience a little bit of both, and I don't see a problem with that. I think um, there's certain value in people showing up and finding the things that they're familiar with if they're from another place, right? So when you and I go to Queens, for example, right, we're gonna go find a roti shop, right? We're gonna eat some roti, we're gonna eat some dal puri and some duck curry, right? We're in the US, right? We're not gravitating towards US brands. So naturally if people are coming from other places, they're gonna want to see brands that they're familiar with. And I think that's okay. What I think we can do as a Guyanese community is go to some of those places, sit down, right? See the process that they're using, see how they're talking to people, right? And they're calling people by name and the way they're interacting with people, and like write those down and then bring it to your experience. Like something as simple as warming something up, right? I mean, like if you have a cheese roll that's cold versus a cheese roll that's warm, it's like a night and day experience, right? If you have a nice warm pint tart versus like a cold pint tart that's just flaking up and it's just like, yeah, it's not very good. um, it's not a good experience, right? And so I think the brands should come, but I think we have to work on creating better experiences where people can enjoy our Guyanese cuisine in sort of an elevated environment. I know there's one place in Guyana that does it, but it's not the easiest place to visit. You can't just walk in. I think you have to make an appointment and you might have to pay for it in advance, and that's a whole different experience. But I do think there are little steps that we can take to sort of enhance what the Guyanese experience is. But we also have to, I think, transition a little bit away from the way we always did things, right? Because I know, like you and I went into a pharmacy the other day together, right? Where you have to slide your money through a hole, you don't see the person that you're paying.
The
And again, I'm
elusive
not judging.
cashier.
Right, and that happens in a lot of places. Like, why is it so hard for us to just have one interaction with one person? And again, I know this requires changing some systems and maybe trusting people a little bit more, but we've got
Yeah,
to be willing to make some shifts, right? And so that people have a better interaction and a happier experience.
yeah, I
Because
hear you, man. I definitely
yeah,
agree
we're
with
not
that.
just serving Guyanese people, right? And Guyanese people deserve an elevated experience, but we're also serving all these other people from all these other places. And
Yeah,
so we want to create the best environment for them, right? When people come to our house, we give up our bed, we bring out the special dishes, we cook the best food, we go, kill a duck. Um, let's do that for the people that visit as well as the people that live there. Let's work on
I
creating a better
the
experience.
thing I like about this part of our conversation, which we'll wrap up before we jump to something else, is and what I'm hearing is we have to learn to package and resell our culture because it's valuable. We have to see commercial value in our culture, right? And we have to add value to the culture in the same way that we add value to a product. So, if you go and you take peas and you pick it and then you can it, right? Now it's got more value because you put it in a can, somebody can now take it from where it is in a can, you could package, you could sell millions of it, right? To other people. Or if you take cassava and you make it into cassava bread, right? You've had some value to it rather than just selling the cassava. And now people want cassava bread, and you can sell it in all sorts of different ways. So I think our culture can be packaged and sold in the same way. And you talk about our food, whether it's tourism, sightseeing, and all of these different things. We really have to figure out and to maintain that identity is how to package and resell that, not just to not just to foreigners, but even to our own Guyanese people, right? To sort of elevate, like you said, the experience of something that they're used to, but having it in a different environment and in a different way. And I think that's pretty solid, man. I think that's pretty solid. And there could be huge economic value in this perspective, in this arena, because we've talked about how Starbucks, for example, took an American culture of drinking coffee and really converted it into something that's sort of a multi-million dollar industry. And you look at as I said, we've been drinking tea and all of this sort of stuff, and we now need to look at how we package and launch our version, right, of Starbucks, but it's like T-Bucks, right? So that we could also, no pun intended, but milk this thing, right? So whether it's milk tea or what, but we can milk this thing in terms of economic value. And so there's no need to feel like we're losing the culture. It could be a case where we are just not good yet at repackaging and reselling our culture as some of the packaged North American brands that we're seeing that's coming into our country. So this is kind of encouraging. I know if you're listening out there and you're an entrepreneur, I know there's a lot of people who have gone into the tea business and they're selling teas, and they're just kind of like selling it overseas. It'd be nice to set up a nice tea shop, create an experience, put some good Guyanese delicacies in that shop, and I can come in there and just pick any Guyanese bush tea I want, including Capadula and everything. And if you go border market, you see they sell all the teas in them. They sell it all there, right? It's not that hard to bring that into a shop and really commercialize that experience, right? Is what people are looking for. And then as people come into the country, they could also benefit, right, from the experience because it's packaged in a way that they definitely can enjoy it. So I think that's pretty solid. Let's talk about let's talk a little bit about maybe the personal aspect of this, right? In terms of how we see ourselves as individuals, and our ability to do certain things. One of the things I was talking to some colleagues of mine about this week was about language, for example, right? And so one of the question that came up is, are we going to give up sort of our Creolese, right, and our speech, because as more and more people come in, there could be this push to more and more English only environments, right? Particularly if you have a huge influx of English individuals, right? So what you're going to find, for example, when you go to hotels and different places, people are going to sort of be, I don't want to use the term force, but they're going to feel forced both culturally and maybe even by management to speak a certain kind of English, right, in order to interact with others, right? And so certain things like Creolese and so forth might get pushed back, right, and be less important to people, and just general feelings of as the country changes and these experiences change, the things that we grew up seeing that sort of marked Guyanese culture, are those things going to disappear? Are they already beginning to kind of disappear? And this could be good or bad, right? We talked about it off screen. that it'd be great if, I mean, there's some good things that you can adopt from a foreign culture, like driving. That's right. I wish you could adopt some North American driving culture. You know, a lot safer, staying in the lanes and obeying the lights and everything. That'd be great. Um, but then you've got some of those negatives that seem to be going up at times. And then sometimes, are we taking the bad? Are we changing our diet in such a way, individually, where we're working more, we're pushing in more hours, so our stress going up? Are we relaxing less? Are we eating less veggies, less healthy foods, and more fast foods, and these sorts of things, right? Just from an individual perspective. So, how do you see that, and what do you think we should be thinking about there?
So those are two separate things, I think, right? I think um, there's a lot of growth on the ground, and growth comes with its own introduction of new things, right? Some of those are
Hmm.
good, some of those are bad. And we're going to battle with some of those for sure. Language is a different thing altogether. Um, I do think that there's something, at least for me, just comforting about our language, right? The way we talk to each other, the words that we use, even certain words that I sometimes don't hear for a really long time, and then I stumble onto it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that word. And so I think we have to preserve our language, but in order to preserve our language, I think we have to start to learn to love and embrace it, right? I've always found it interesting. I started going to Jamaica in early 2000s, and it was always amazing to me how I could hear like the CEO of Grace Kennedy, which is a global company, speak Jamaican patois, right? And we don't necessarily always embrace um, our Guyanese Creole the same way. And so I think there is sort of a need to preserve that because it is a part of our identity. But I also think people like it, right? So like my kids, for example, they're not Guyanese, but they go to Guyana, they spend a couple of weeks, and they learn a few words. And they're excited, right? They can speak. They're like, oh, I can speak Guyanese, right? And it's almost like they start rattling it up, and that's good, right? I think that's what we want. That's what we want people to know, that this is who we are. And people often ask me, what language do you guys speak in Ghana? I was like, we speak English, but it's a kind of an English, right?
Right.
Um, but I do think we have to preserve that. But I think to preserve it, we have to appreciate the fact that it's ours, and it comes from somewhere. I know you have a better historical understanding of
Mhm.
the origination of our Guyanese Creole, which is good, right? I mean, it came as a result of who we are as a people and our coming
Yep.
together and our different backgrounds, and it's uniquely ours, right? Like you can you could go to Jamaica and speak Guyanese, and if you speak it well enough, people can understand you. So it's like it's our own little code. But I do think it's an opportunity as more people get introduced to Guyana, that we introduce them to our language, right? Like wherever in the world you go, people just seem to think, yeah, man, right? There's a Jamaican thing, right? That's a universal Jamaican thing, and it would be nice to have a universal known Guyanese thing, right? We're more on the. It's funny because we've always been all over the world as Guyanese people. I don't think you can go anywhere in the world and not meet a Guyanese person. But now more people are learning about Guyana, and so I think therefore we
Yeah.
ought to present them with what we have as a country, right? And like I said, I think there's a lot of rich stuff there to share. The language is part of it. The issue with growth, I think that's sort of in my mind just a product of where we're going, and we're going to have to navigate that to the best of our ability. But the language, I think, is a part of our identity, and we ought to keep that. Some of the growth stuff, I think we should embrace it. I think sometimes we lie way too much, right? Or we could work better, we could save better, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy life, but I'm always appalled how um, I could drive around at midnight on a Sunday night and people partying hard. Again, I'm not saying you should party, but come on, man, you got to go to work on Monday. Go home and get some sleep. If not for work, go get some good rest, right? Because we can't continue to want to fuel growth in our country, and we're partying at Sunday at midnight. So again, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just stating a fact and an observation that I feel like we could change some of that. Let's not hold on to that identity too much.
Yeah, no, I completely I see you on that. Like I said, in terms of language, the language is an important part of who we are, and I think we have to figure out how to weave that into. It's already kind of part of the fabric, right, of who we are, but there's this sort of double side to it. This sort of um, double messaging that goes out. On the one hand, if you don't speak Guyanese, sometimes you get accused of not being Guyanese enough, right? So, for example, even someone like me, whose accent may have changed over the years, someone may hear that and make assumptions about, oh, how Guyanese are you,
You got you
because
got
you
that you
speak.
got that PhD accent. That's why.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose it's that PhD. That's fine. That's fine. Right, but what happens there is that people sometimes listen to your language, right, to be able to sort of judge your connection to the culture, right? And so if they don't hear it, there are issues with, hey, maybe he's not Guyanese enough. But at the same time, if you speak good English, people want that. They're like, yeah, this guy speaks good English. We like this. And so, which is it? Right? Which is it? Is it the good English, or is it the culture? And I feel like there is an opposing thing there, right? Where people do expect you, particularly in English only circles, to be able to speak English eloquently. But at the same time, they want you to speak Creolese eloquently in order to sort of show that you've got this Guyanese badge. And I think that sends confusing and sort of a double standard to a lot of young people, because I run into a lot of young people who get into rooms and it becomes an English only room. And when it's time for them to present, they lose a fair bit of self confidence to be able to express themselves in those spaces because their primary language is Creolese. And so we have to address. I think as we grow and as our identity expands, I think we have to be able to sort of reaffirm that this is part of our culture and kind of where it came from, and develop this sort of pride around our pride around the language. I think you're right. There are some, the old adage of eat the banana and throw away the skin. You kind of have to know what aspects of a foreign culture you want to adopt, and what aspects of it you don't want to adopt. Since I'm in the healthcare space, I always tell people, let's be careful with our diet. We've got a lot of fresh veggies, a lot of fresh fruits in Guyana. Coconut water, like, available, on the street and things like this. Utilize these things, right? And take advantage of those aspects of the culture, because I think that they are helpful in things like the overall health that we see. Whereas when you look at a lot of processed foods, which tends to be associated with some of the developed countries, a lot of processed foods, we know that these things aren't good for us, right? And so we want to sort of avoid some of those things. So I think you're right. I think we can maintain and even enhance our Guyanese identity by being selective about what we are choosing, right, to adopt from a particular country, right, or immigrants that come to our country. We want to encourage things that make the identity and the culture distinct, but also overall sort of beneficial and healthy and wholesome, right, across the Guyanese landscape. So I think that's good. So I don't know that yet if we're losing it. I think our identity is going to change and evolve, right? That's probably a fair thing to say. What we're going to see is not maybe a loss, but an evolution of the identity. And we have control over how that identity is evolved over time, for good or bad. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, we're going through changes, and we have to have a conversation for sure. I think one of the things that, like, I'll give a simple example that I've observed is that is a good example is, like, we always get excited about eating fries, but it seems like in Ghana now we have just entirely fall in love with our plantain fries, right? Way better tasting, and the plantain in Guyana just tastes a whole lot different. So that's good. But I also, driving up the East Coast, I see these breadfruit trees loaded with breadfruit, and they're ripe because I know what a ripe breadfruit looks like. I was like, man, that would be some really good bread because I've had breadfruit
Breadfruit
fries.
fries are good too.
They're really, really good, right? And they're so much more wholesome and healthy than the stuff that you get. And I get, I'm not, I eat fries. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat fries, but it's just a
But
breadfruit
let's face it,
fries.
plantain fries
Is,
and breadfruit fries are better than white potato fries.
they are. I don't know in terms of in terms of health benefits what the measure is, but like I'm saying, I think the challenge for us is to look around and see what we have, and how can we present some of that stuff to people so that they can enjoy it. But I'm gonna make a plug for breadfruit fries. Let's make that a thing, or
All right.
breadfruit chips. Those are pretty good too.
Yeah.
And there's an abundance of breadfruit growing all over the country. I've seen it. So yeah, we're going through changes, and I think these conversations are good. We love our Guyanese identity. We embrace it, but let's package it as you said and present it to people so that they can learn to love it the same way we do. A lot of the
Yeah.
food that we eat, it's best eaten when you're in somebody's home and you present it. But now that we've got to take it out to the public,
Good to,
we have
yeah,
to make
yeah,
sure
yeah.
that it's just like if they come in our pot and they dish out the hot food from the stove and they're eating it. Let's present it that way. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Cool, man. Hey, thanks for having this conversation, man. I think it's been enlightening. Hopefully, people go back over what we talked about, guys. If you missed it, we've been talking about the changes and the evolution that we're seeing in our home country, Guyana, and how we view that in terms of our identity, whether we're losing it or whether it's evolving, and what aspects from other cultures do we want to adopt into our own culture, what aspects of our culture we might need to give up in order to go through sort of this new development phase that we're going through. So feel free to expand this conversation with friends and family out there. But and I'm sure a lot of people, you can leave your comments, different aspects of the culture that you feel we might need to get rid of, and other aspects of the culture that we certainly want to embrace, as well as maybe ideas for how we can package and even commercialize aspect of our culture to generate that next generation of entrepreneurs, that could take things like to the level of Starbucks and KFC and these sorts of things, right? Our own local sort of entrepreneurs, creating opportunities even within our own culture to generate wealth. So I think this has been a great conversation, Rich. We should probably give this some time and talk a little bit more about what we see. We're going to start seeing a whole set of new hotels and things going up. So I'm pretty sure that within 6 to 12 months, there's going to be a lot more to talk about in terms of how the culture continues to change. So, guys, thank you for joining us. All right,
All
keep
right.
expanding the
Take care, everybody.
conversation.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.